Okay, I want to say hello to everybody. Thank you for coming on this afternoon. I am certainly glad to see you. Appreciate you taking the time out of your busy, challenging schedules to be with us. I know it's a challenge. It's a challenge here with us too. Um, Ms. Lopez, welcome. I know you got called in to help us out at the last minute, but thank you so much. We appreciate you working with our students. You're at Brogdon Primary, right? Yeah, Dr. Moore, she's at Brogdon Primary. Dr. Moore used
Oh,
to be at Brogdon Middle School. So, yeah, he was the principal there
okay,
for, for a while. Um,
good.
so we'll get started. Let's just pause for a moment of silence if you don't mind. That'll help us to kind of stay grounded for a second or two. But thank you. I always say, breathe in now. Sometimes we get um, a reflection video that comes to say, breathe in now. So we breathe in and then you let it go. So that kind of helps us out. Well, I hope things are going well for you. I'd like to start out with a couple of things. First of all, to ask if you have any questions, any comments or concerns.
I do not know.
Okay. And I want to apologize for the mistake. When I set the Zoom, I hit 2. I was aiming, hoping for 3. In my mind, it was 3. So, and somebody reminded me this morning that you said 3, but the Zoom said 2. So as I explained in the email, I felt like it was just easier to keep the Zoom set up than to send you another link. So here we are at 2. We have who we have, and we'll videotape it. And if anybody wants it, then they are welcome to have it. Since you don't have any questions right now, we'll just delve into what I have for you this afternoon. As I was sharing with Dr. Moore, and most of you probably received maybe it's received an email. Our students on campus have been, we're going to online learning for a couple of weeks because we have a few more cases of quarantined students than we'd rather have. So we're trying to avoid having to send them home for the rest of the year. So we just decided to, well, they decided to let them go home for a little while and let's see if that'll help. So we have to continue to monitor that situation. And you have to excuse me for a second because when people come on, I have to take a moment to write the names down. I just want to remind you that I'd like for you, if at all possible, to push your students to the point that they can go ahead and get all their classes in. We do leave here the Wednesday of Thanksgiving, and our students will not return to campus. However, that doesn't negate the fact that they can continue to work in the school system. Graduation is normally, we don't know what that's going to look like, but students start exams the first week of December. So if you have a student teaching intern who needs to continue to intern that week, it's okay. We just know that last week, school is out the 12th, I think. It's normally somewhere along the week of the 9th, 7th through the 12th, because graduation would have normally been on the 12th. So I don't know what they're going to do this year. So just so you can keep that in mind, they need those four full loads for 4 weeks. So the faster you can get them into that mode, the better off they will be. And of course, they submitted task 1 on the 22nd, I think it was, and it was due, I think, around 2 o'clock. I had a student yesterday who had to pay an extra $50 because the student did hit send. However, they were doing testing at their school and the students were getting kicked off, and I'm assuming she got kicked off. So she just spun and spun and spun and it never got submitted. So she had to pay extra money. So what I would say would be to make sure that your interns submit well in advance, if at all possible, so that if something happens and it doesn't get submitted, they will not have to pay another fee in order to resubmit. So I just wanted to share that with you. I think that's pretty much everything that we need, but how are you coming? I'd asked initially if you had any questions or comments, but how are things coming with you working with your clinical teacher? I know most of you are virtual, some of you are hybrid. So are you experiencing?
I'm sorry, I've got a question about the PPAT task. I'm not familiar with it. But as far as that, I think there's 4 assignments that they have to complete. What is our role in that? Are we
I'll
supposed
go
to help
over that.
review, or
Okay.
am I jumping ahead?
Yeah, well, I can go over that with you. I was ready for that if nobody else had anything else that they wanted to.
Okay.
Most of the people here now are probably familiar with PPAT, but for your purposes, I will go over it quickly in order to share the information with you. You may visit www.ets.org, Ms. Lopez, and just follow the links for PPAT, for the PPAT assessment. As you indicated initially, there are 4 tasks. Task 1, of course, which has already been submitted, and I'm hoping that Nikki's supervising professor helped her with that because she did get on a little bit late. It's task 1, knowledge of students and the learning environment, as we said, has already been submitted. Now, task 2 is assessment and data collection to measure and inform student learning. Task 3 is designing instruction for student learning. And task 4 is implementing and analyzing instruction to promote student learning. And task 4 comes with a 15-minute video. That 15-minute video could be a 15-minute unedited continuous video, or the student could have 5-minute unedited segments of the video to be submitted. I have also sent to you from ETS the guidance for completing the PPAT assessment in a virtual learning environment or hybrid model. So most of you should have that. I'm trying to get it so you can see it. I sent it via email. It's kind of hard. Oh, there you go. That's what it looks like. So you should have that. That will help you to help the students to complete their task via virtual learning. So if you don't have that, let me know and I'll send it back out. And what we wanted to do today, I was going to go over just briefly task 2 and task 3. My recommendation is that you visit the website and you do the deep dive. I could very easily share the task 2. That would probably be easier for me. But I'll reserve that because it may be quicker and easier for you to view both of those. And I'll just talk through it with you. So today
Can I ask a quick question, Dr. Bell? I'm sorry.
Yes.
This is Heather Watson, and we're 100% virtual until Christmas. So Lisa is doing all of her stuff online. So how will her PPAT requirements be different as a virtual teacher versus a face-to-face teacher who's doing part virtual and part in person?
Okay, if you refer to the guidance for completing the PPAT assessment in a virtual learning environment from ETS, that will help you. I mean, they have already come up with what they need. If you will refer to that document, that will help you with everything that you need. They know, they understand. That's why they prepared the document to help the students. So there's nothing she can do about it. Lisa's a good student. I don't think you're gonna have any problems with her doing what she needs to do. And I think she mentioned yesterday that she had not received this document and I resent it. I don't know what happened. She was in the list to receive it. Have you received it, Ms. Watson?
Yes, ma'am. I have just got it printed out. Lisa brought it to me this morning. She is an excellent student. I was wondering if there were any exemplars created, because in the previous webinar we did with you, I went to look at the exemplars and they didn't seem to match up with what the current testing looked like. So I apologize if that has already been asked or I missed it.
Okay, let me contact ETS because they were supposed to post those. So.
Thank you so much. That's all I have.
Yes, that's fine. I will contact ETS for exemplars. They had a cut back as well, so I don't know what has happened to them. They're normally pretty much on the game, but we'll look. I'll share information with them, and maybe they will go ahead and get those up. Okay, thank you for that. I appreciate it. All right, let's look at quick review of task 2. I see Dr. Paul Gainey is with us. So Dr. Gainey, at any time, if there's something you'd like to add, please feel free to do so. Let me see if I can task 2.
Can I interrupt for just a second, Dr. Bell?
Yes, and 2 and 3 are both due October the 14th. Okay.
Just pass this word along to your interns. I'm doing this for the residency students, but I can also include the interns in the group. October 10th, we're supposed to do a face-to-face session on the campus from 9 to 1 on that Saturday to work on task number 2 and 3. However, with the shutdown on the campus till the 5th, Dr. Maxwell and I are going to make a decision as to whether to try to do that face-to-face on the 10th or whether to go digital again. We did a digital one on the 29th of August to work with task 1, and we had 35 people who took advantage of it. So I'm thinking that we probably are going to have to go digital with this one, depending on what happens with the current shutdown on the campus. But I will say this, taking apart task number 2, since task number 2 is dealing with assessments.
Mm-hmm.
If your folks are doing an assessment, like for example, if you're doing pre-K and your folks are doing the Brigance, or they're doing M-class in grades 1 through 3, or they're doing North Carolina check-ins in grades 3 through 8, anything that's an assessment that's already there, please tell your interns. They don't have to create an assessment from scratch. They can use something that's already in the district's arsenal of assessments, as long as they can determine how to take the data and how to use it to inform their instruction on task number 2. And that's just a little nutshell thing that as far as that's concerned, if they're doing something already, use what they're already doing. Don't make them reinvent something all over again that might leave them to where they're not explaining it as well to ETS as they need to. I'm going to be quiet now because I'm done.
Anytime. It's great. Thank you.
One question for Dr. Gainey.
Yes,
Is
ma'am.
there, Lisa had a task 2 and 3 session scheduled on the 29th of this month at 6:30. Are you still doing that one?
I'm still going to do it. What we traditionally had set up to do was we would lead into the task with a Zoom session, and then we do a face-to-face. And then of course, COVID-19 has ruined every good plan we wrote for this thing. So we had to back up and punt in the month of August. But one of the reasons why we did it so early in August was because our folks were already doing the pieces they needed to do well for task 1. In other words, they were doing the getting to know you sheets. They were doing the parent information things that were going home and things like that. They were already doing them. So it made sense to do it early while they were doing them so they could go ahead and make that connection and do task 1. But we are going to do the one on the 29th. At 6:30, it'll be about a 40-minute long thing to kind of to help them get their minds wrapped around it. And then, and I'll be sending out the link for the Zoom session on that. Heck, I'll be sending the link out for that probably tomorrow. So that being said, they'll get that. And then the 10th is all up in the air. We may have to go face-to-face or we may go Zoom. More than likely, we're going to have to go Zoom, I'm afraid, because of the situation, particularly if the campus does not open back up.
Okay. Thank you, Dr. Gainey.
Sure.
That. And thank you, Ms. Watson, for that question. I guess it helped to clarify some other things. Let's just delve into 2. And You've heard Dr. Gainey, he will chime in if he has some things to add to what I have to say. And of course, as a reminder, that task is due on the 14th, but please encourage your students to get those in as soon as possible. Can everybody see the screen for task 2?
Okay.
Okay, task 2 is assessment and data collection to measure and inform student learning. So here are the artifacts. There are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 artifacts. You must have a student must submit a representative page of a selected assessment, a page for baseline data from the entire class, a scoring guide or a rubric. Please let them know that if it's a subject that there is if there's already a rubric for it, they do not have to invent one, or scoring guide. If they can find one that goes along with the objective and the assignment, then, or the assessment, they do not have to recreate, as Dr. Gainey said, even with the assessment. And of course, a baseline data for your focus student 1 and 2. We'll talk about them a little bit later. And then a representative show of the graphic for your data collection. It can either be a spreadsheet, a pie chart, or a table. Make it simple. The easier, I guess, the simpler it is, the better it is for the student. And it doesn't have to be in too much detail, just as long as it shows the data that has been collected. And then of course they have to select 2 students, and they're referred to as focus student 1 and focus student 2. Okay. So we're gonna kind of move through this quickly. 2.1, the first is planning the assessment and selecting a single assessment. So what's important, as you already know, the students have to focus on the guiding prompts, Ms. Lopez. And this 2.1.1, the students are to develop or select, as Gainey said, an assessment. But that assessment must also relate to the state standards. Of course, everything we do, every lesson we teach has to be based on the standards. And of course, the students have to include a scoring guide or a rubric. As I said before, they can develop, they can design, or they can select one that is already available to them. And in this process, the student must also describe the assessment and tell why this particular assessment was used, give a rationale for why this one was selected. And of course, the assessment must be connected to the standards that have been used. They also must provide baseline data for the learning goals and the lesson, of course, and the objectives. They should also, let me see to make sure that they should describe the rubric and the scoring guide. They should tell how it aligns with the goals and objectives, and tell how they're going to introduce that rubric or scoring guide to the students. Now, in the past, we've been taught that a lot of times students can't handle a scoring guide or a rubric because it might get them anxious. So you have to fill your class. If you can share it with your students and they can grow from it, fine. But if you feel it's going to provide more anxiety than anything else, then you may not want to do that, but that is your call. And if you decide to do that and write in your prompt, just make sure that you indicate that to ETS, that this rubric wasn't shared ahead of time for my students because I have several students who would have been anxious or it would have made them nervous. But you would be okay with students will be okay, I'm sorry, with doing that as long as they explain it. Also, they have to provide the evidence of student learning that was collected using the assessment and explain how that data was collected, okay? 2.12 is preparing learners for the assessment. Here, they want you to share, the students to share with them what learning activities will be used during the assessment and provide a rationale on what learning activities, what materials will be used, I think, as well as any resources or any technology that they will use in order to administer the assessment, and always provide a rationale for that. 2.3 are the two focus students. The students are to select two students who have different learning needs from different learning backgrounds. They must also modify that assessment that they have selected for both of those students based on their learning needs. And then they also have to tell how the baseline data was established for each of those two students. I paraphrased this, so it's not exactly what you're going to see. All right, 2.1, let me go back up. I somehow lost that one. 2.2.1 is an analysis of the assessment data and student learning for the whole class. All right, with this, students have to provide that graphic representation of the data. For example, they could use a graph or any other type of a chart, whatever they decide to use. They just need to upload that to ETS and use that to analyze the data. Use your graph to analyze the data to help your students to determine if your student has made progress. So, you know, you probably do a little bit of before and a little bit of after assessments to see if your students made progress, and then explain your data collection process. You know, a lot of times you might want to give a pre-test and a post-test, and then you can talk about it if that's necessary. And how are your students engaged with this process, with the data collection? 2.2 is analysis of the assessment data and the student learning for each of the two focus students. Let's see, 2.2.2. What information was gained about the progress of the two focus students as you went along? Did you get any information in order to, did they receive information in order to help the students? And if so, they're supposed to cite any evidences that they have collected. Did any of the modifications have an impact on the two students, the modifications that were made to the assessment? And how were the students engaged? What activities helped the students to stay engaged? .3.1 is reflected on the assessment for the whole class. How was the data collected? And how was it used in order to guide instruction? And what modifications to the data collection process, I think, and the assessments could be made in order to make it better, to make the lesson better? Because remember, this is a reflective process. So what could you have done to modify the data collection process? What could you have done to modify the assessment that might have made it better for the students? And I'm talking to you, I apologize as if I'm talking to the students, but you know who I'm talking to. And would another assessment, the question is, would another assessment be better than the one that you selected? And if you think so, retrospectively and reflecting back, then you are to tell, the student is supposed to tell why another assessment would have been better.
Dr. Bell, one question.
Yes.
With the assessment that they're doing, and forgive me for all the questions, this is my first time, I want to make sure I get it right. With the assessments that Lisa's doing, when she has chosen her focus students, was she supposed to do a modified pre-test and a modified post-test, or just the modified post-test?
If it were me, because I've selected those two students, because you're doing that based on their learning needs,
Yes.
modified pre and post.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Because you've already identified their needs, right? She should have already identified their needs.
Yes, it's already done. Thank you so much.
You're welcome so much. 2.3.2, reflecting on the assessment for each of the two students. What was successful about the assessment that you provided for those two students, and they're supposed to tell why? And how was the data used to inform the teaching? And what modifications would that would need to be made in the future. Even though modifications were made in advance for the pre-test and post-test, once the students were tested, once the lesson was completed, could anything else be done? Could the assessment be modified again in order to help those students better achieve the goal? Okay, questions? I think that's it for that one. Any questions? Okay. Let's see if I can find 3. Can y'all see 3?
Yes.
Good, thank you. All right, task 3 is designing instruction for student learning. The artifacts are representative pages of a lesson plan for the whole class that includes the use of technology. You should have the lesson plan that goes along with the ETS PPAT. They're using that. So that should be good to help them plan. And then of course, a representative page of a differentiated lesson plan for Focus Student 1 and Focus Student 2. So whatever the subject is, it must be differentiated for both of these students. And you must also provide work samples for any class member other than the 2 Focus students, and then a work sample for the 2 Focus students. Okay, 3.1.1 standards and learning goals. Very easily and simply, what are the learning goals? What are the theories and the methods that will be used for this lesson? And why are you using that particular theory or that particular method? What are the learning goals? We know every time we do a lesson plan, we must have our goals and objectives. And what is the content focus of the lesson? And how is that content that will be used in this lesson related to previous lessons? Okay, and what might be some difficulties that the students might encounter with this particular lesson? The 3.1.2 is instructional strategies. What instructional strategies will be used and why? How will those strategies connect to the learning goals that will help facilitate learning? And how will the student either use individual, small group, or whole group instruction in order to facilitate learning? They can decide which one they want to use, but they must also understand why they are using that, either one of those groups. 3.1.3, learning activities. What learning activities will be used and why? How will they address the strengths and needs of the students? And how did the class demographics inform the selection of that learning activity? Once that student has reviewed that class to see what the demographics are, how were those activities selected, or how did the demographics in that classroom help that student select that particular activity? That's what's important. That's why we did the task 1, so that the students would get to know their students so that they could provide the appropriate strategies and activities for the students in that class. Okay, 3.1.4 is materials, resources, and technology. Very simply, what materials, resources, and technology will be used to support the lesson and why, and what type of technology will be used to enhance instruction. Try to remember that they do have to have some form of technology. 3.2.1, understanding each of the 2 focus students and differentiating instruction. And let's see, the students have to identify the strengths and the challenges for each of the focus students as it relates to the learning goal. This is focus student 1 on the screen. Focus student 2 is after this one, but it's the same information. So you have to identify, the student has to identify the strengths and the challenges for each of those students as it relates to the learning goals. And then tell how the lesson will be differentiated for both of those students and tell why that differentiation was chosen. And then, of course, they have to collect evidence as they go through the lesson to show progress for these two students. Focus student 2, as you can see, it's the same. And 3.31, analyzing the instruction for the whole class. How did the lesson facilitate student learning? To include, I think it's in instructional strategies, learning activities, the materials, the resources, and there again, you have technology. And they must show evidence to support their findings. Also, they have to explain how the students demonstrated meaningful learning during the time of this lesson, and they want them to provide examples. And it says, were any adjustments made during the teaching? And if so, because sometimes, you know, we can teach and we can get into the lesson and we have to turn in order to make sure that make a change, do something different because maybe the students are not grasping the information. So did that happen? And if so, share what that was in order to be able to make that clear to the person who is reading. And I will say this, people reading, task 1 is not scored by ETS, but 2, 3, and 4 are, and they're scored by people who are experts in the selected areas. Okay, 3.3.1, how do students demonstrate meaningful learning, provide examples of that, any adjustments made. Then they have to explain how there was student to student interaction and teacher to student interaction, and what was done in order to foster that interaction. Okay. So that continues with that. And 3.3.2 is analyzing the differentiated instruction for each of the two students. Focus students, did the two focus students achieve the learning goal? Plain and simple. Did they or did they not? And they're supposed to provide examples. And did the differentiation help the students to meet the goals? In other words, if what the student teacher did it make a difference in order to help those students meet or not meet their goals? 3.4.1, reflected on the lesson for the whole class. And of course, you can go back and read these in detail. I'm just summarizing them for you. What specific strategies, activities, resources, technology, again, was used to help the students who did not achieve the goal? Okay, as you were going through the process, as they were going through the process of teaching, and they found students who were not grasping the idea of what changes were made and what other activities or resources were used in order to help those students that did not, who were not meeting the standards, and how did the students use those results? Will they use the results of the lesson in order to plan for future lessons? I think this is what the reflection, as you know, is all about. 3, and we're at the end. 3.4.2 is reflecting on the differentiated instruction for each of the focus students. And all it asks is, how will you use your analysis of the lesson and evidence of student learning to guide your planning for future lessons for each of the two students, and give an example? And that's what we do. That's the purpose of planning a lesson. And most importantly, that's the purpose of reflecting so that we can change our direction if necessary and if needed. So task 2, task 3, do October, same day, 14th, I think. Doesn't have to be in order, but that's up to you. So you have any other questions? All right, I will schedule another meeting. I hope I get the time on this one right. Hope I get the Zoom time right, plus the scheduled time right for the next one. If you have questions, send me an email. Work extremely hard if you can to get your student to get those 4 full classes of 4 full weeks of full load as soon as possible so that we can finish up before we go over Thanksgiving, if at all possible. Other than that, I think we're good to go. Stay safe, stay well first, stay safe, and take good care.
Thank you, Dr. Baker.
You're welcome. I will call you shortly regarding your student, Dr. Moore.